He had just 5 minutes left before the gate closed. But when he saw the frail woman struggling with her bags, something made him stop. He didn't know her. No one else seemed to care. She wasn't crying or calling out, just slowly inching her way across the terminal with trembling hands, dragging 2 overstuffed suitcases that looked heavier than she was. And in that instant, everything inside him said, "Help her." He didn't think twice. He turned around. That single decision would not only make him miss his flight, but would unravel a story so bizarre and life-altering that people would still talk about it years later. No one, not even the airport staff, realized who the woman really was. And as for Nolan, he had no clue that by missing a flight, he was stepping into the biggest twist of his life. Nolan had always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was inconvenient. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He didn't wear designer clothes or drive a luxury car. He was just a 32-year-old aircraft maintenance technician who had saved up for 2 years to take a vacation with his younger brother, Raylan. It wasn't some exotic getaway, just a simple beach trip to the coast, something they both needed after the year they'd had. Their mother had passed away the previous spring, and things hadn't felt the same since. Nolan had taken time off work to care for her in her final months, and after she passed, the weight of grief mixed with guilt over not being able to save her had left him mentally drained. Raylan had struggled too, but they barely talked about it. They just existed. This trip was supposed to be their way of reconnecting, starting over. But now Nolan stood at the far end of Terminal C, holding the woman's bags, watching the flight status screen switch from final call to closed. He sighed, not because he regretted helping her, but because he knew Raylan would be frustrated. They'd planned this trip carefully, and now he'd messed it up. "You didn't have to do that," the woman said quietly, her voice thin but kind. "You're missing your flight because of me." "It's fine," Nolan said, forcing a smile. "They'll put me on the next one. Or not. Either way, you needed help." She gave him a long look, as if she were studying something invisible behind his eyes. "Most people wouldn't have stopped." He shrugged. "Then most people are idiots." The woman chuckled, a low, tired sound. "What's your name, young man?" "Nolan. Nolan Cade." "Well, Mr. Cade," she said, reaching into her worn-out purse, "let me buy you another ticket." "You don't have to do that." "I insist." He waved her off. "Really, it's fine. I'll figure it out." She watched him for another moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay. But let me ask you something. Why did you help me?" Nolan blinked. "Because you needed help. No one else saw me. They saw you. They just didn't care. And you? I cared." That seemed to be enough for her. She gave a soft nod and said, "I hope the world is kind to you, Mr. Cade." She walked away after that. No last name, no thank you, just those words. Nolan didn't even notice the man in a gray suit watching the entire exchange from behind the coffee kiosk. An hour later, Nolan sat near gate C13 with his phone pressed to his ear, listening to Raylan rant. "Dude, seriously? You helped some random old lady and missed the flight? You're unbelievable." "She was struggling, man. You couldn't just tell someone else to help? Would you have?" Raylan went quiet for a second. "Okay. Fair. But now what? You're stuck. The next flight isn't till tomorrow. I'll grab a cheap hotel nearby. I'll meet you there tomorrow afternoon." "Yeah, but we lose a whole day." "I know. I'm sorry." Raylan sighed. "Whatever. Just don't miss it tomorrow, all right? Promise." After the call, Nolan looked up flights. Everything was booked solid except for one standby slot early the next morning. He clicked to reserve it and leaned back. He never expected what happened next. The man in the gray suit approached him half an hour later. "You Nolan Cade?" "Yeah. Who's asking?" "My name's Sterling Locke. I work for Atravia Airlines." Nolan straightened. "That's the flight I just missed." "I know. I was informed." "Informed?" Sterling sat down beside him. "The woman you helped, Ms. Noreen Vellon, she asked me to find you." Nolan frowned. "Okay." "She wants to meet with you, tomorrow morning, at the Atravia Executive Lounge." Nolan blinked. "Why?" "She didn't say. But when Ms. Vellon makes a request, we move." "She some VIP?" Sterling just smiled. "You could say that." Nolan's curiosity was piqued, but he didn't push. He agreed to the meeting and headed to a motel near the airport. The next morning, he showed up at the executive lounge wearing his cleanest shirt and a vague sense of awkwardness. He was ushered inside past people in designer suits and polished shoes. And then he saw her again. Noreen Vellon was sitting in a leather chair near a massive glass window overlooking the runway. She looked just as frail as the day before. Maybe more so, but she had a confidence now. A quiet command of the room that Nolan hadn't noticed before. She gestured for him to sit. "You came," she said simply. "You asked," he replied. She smiled. "I told you I hoped the world would be kind to you, but I realize now, maybe it should be the other way around." "What do you mean?" She set down the tea she'd been holding and folded her hands. "Nolan, I've owned this airline for 27 years. My health is declining, and I've begun the process of stepping back, but I'm not leaving it to just anyone." He stared at her, heart thudding. "Wait, you own Atravia?" "Yes, and I've been looking for someone who understands what matters. Not just numbers or logistics, but people, kindness, integrity." I'm not qualified for that." "I disagree," Nolan shook his head. "I'm just a technician. I fix things, I don't run companies." "Then you'll learn." He stood up, overwhelmed. "Ms. Vellon, I appreciate what you're saying, but this is insane. You don't even know me." "I know more than you think. I ran a background check last night. Your employment record, your family, the time you gave up a promotion to care for your dying mother, the way you took responsibility when an aircraft malfunction turned out to be someone else's error. But you covered for them to protect the team. You've led quietly, without asking for anything in return." He sat down again, stunned. "I've seen hundreds of executives, thousands of resumes, but I remember who I used to be. A woman no one helped, because no one cared. You stopped. You cared. And maybe that's the kind of person who should be in charge." Nolan couldn't respond. He just stared, trying to process the fact that his entire life had just been flipped upside down because he chose to help someone. And that was before she gave him the letter. It was a formal offer, a 1-year mentorship under her direct supervision, full pay, full benefits, a path toward eventual executive leadership. He sat in silence, reading the letter twice, then looking at her again. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because when no one else stopped, you did." But the surprises weren't over, not even close. Because just 2 days later, Raylan would discover a shocking truth that would shake their relationship. Nolan would be faced with a heartbreaking moral decision, and Noreen's true past, a secret buried for decades, would explode into public view. And Nolan would have to choose between his future and hers. Nolan could barely feel his hands as he held the letter. His palms were damp, his throat dry, and it felt like the lounge had gone silent. even though people were still walking around, sipping lattes and holding quiet business calls. He looked at Noreen again, trying to search for a sign that this was some kind of test, some joke, a misunderstanding. But there was nothing insincere in her face, just calm certainty. She meant it, every word. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "Don't say anything yet," she replied gently. "Take a few days. Think about it. You'd begin as my executive apprentice, not some corporate puppet. You'd be learning directly under me, shadowing real decisions. I'd pay you enough to live without worry, and you'd still have time to visit your brother. That vacation you planned, you won't lose it." "But what if I mess it up?" he asked, voice low. "You will," she said without hesitation. "Everyone does. But the ones who admit it and grow from it, those are the ones who matter." He sat there with the offer in his lap, unsure of what to do next. By the next morning, Nolan was back at the hotel, pacing. He hadn't told Raylan anything about the offer yet, just said he'd caught the early morning flight and would meet him at the coast by evening. But Nolan wasn't on the flight. He hadn't even tried to board. Instead, he spent hours thinking about the responsibility, the risks, the chances of failing, but also the opportunity. This wasn't about money. It was about meaning. He'd spent years fixing metal and wires, but what Noreen was offering was something else. A way to influence how people were treated from the top down. That night, as he sat in the hotel room with his phone in hand, trying to figure out how to explain it all to Raylan, a knock came at the door. He opened it and froze. Raylan stood there, shoulders tense, holding his own phone in one hand and a printed-out article in the other. "I had to see for myself," Raylan said, stepping inside. "Wait, how did you—" "News broke this morning. The Travia Airline's CEO offers position to technician who missed flight to help her." "Your name's everywhere, Nolan." Nolan's heart dropped. "What?" "I was scrolling through headlines at breakfast. You never showed up. So I figured you missed the second flight too. Then boom, your face on every feed." "Raylan, I was going to call." "Yeah? When? After your corporate jet landed in Bali?" Nolan sighed. "I didn't ask for this. I was helping someone." "I get that," Raylan cut in. "That's who you are. But why didn't you say anything? You left me hanging." "Because I didn't know how to explain it. I'm still processing it myself." Raylan tossed the article on the bed. "So what now? You going to be her apprentice? Wear a suit and give orders while I'm still fixing trucks for minimum wage? That's not fair, and you know it." "I know life's not fair. You got lucky." "It wasn't luck. I stopped to help someone. That's it. I missed my flight. I didn't ask for this job. She offered. She saw something in me." "Good for you," Raylan said, voice tight. "But what happens when they chew you up and spit you out? These people, rich people, they don't give without strings attached." Nolan looked away, then quietly said, "She's not like that." Raylan scoffed. "You don't even know her." "Neither do you." They stared at each other for a moment. Two brothers who had always leaned on each other, but now stood on opposite sides of something too big to ignore. "I needed this trip," Raylan said finally. "I needed time with my brother. Not to watch him vanish into some corporate fantasy." "I'm not vanishing. I'm trying to do something that matters." "I hope it does." Raylan turned and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. Nolan sat down on the edge of the bed, unsure of whether he'd just made the best decision of his life. or the worst one for his family. But things didn't get easier. 2 days later, Nolan began his first week shadowing Noreen. She was sharp, methodical, and surprisingly down to earth. She took notes during meetings, asked questions most executives ignored, and seemed to remember every detail. Nolan followed her through every decision, from staffing budgets to route disputes. And though he was technically just an apprentice, it didn't feel like it. She treated him like a partner. Every day she asked for his opinion and listened. Still, there were whispers. People at headquarters noticed the new guy with no tie and rough hands following the CEO around. Some were curious. Others weren't so kind. One manager even cornered him in the elevator. "So you're the charity case," the man sneered. "Nice to see Noreen's social experiment still going strong." "I'm just here to learn," Nolan replied calmly. "Sure you are. Just remember, when this falls apart, don't say I didn't warn you." Nolan didn't respond. He'd heard worse. Besides, he wasn't here for them. He was here to honor the trust Noreen had placed in him. But then, things shifted. 3 weeks into the apprenticeship, Noreen collapsed during a private meeting. Nolan caught her before she hit the floor. They rushed her to the hospital. Tests, scans, monitors, and then silence. Noreen had stage 4 cancer. She'd known for months. The trip to the airport, a test. She hadn't needed help that day. She wanted to see if anyone would help. It had been part of her own private decision-making process to find someone worthy. She chose Nolan because he had no idea who she was, and still helped anyway. Now her health was failing fast. And the board? They were circling like vultures. With Noreen out of commission, her position as CEO was vulnerable. Her protégé was a nobody in their eyes, and they were ready to move in. Sterling Locke, the same man who had first approached Nolan, called him into a private meeting. "The board's planning a vote," he said. "They want someone else in charge while Noreen recovers. Someone experienced." "Then why tell me?" "Because Noreen trusted you, and because I think there's a chance to preserve what she started, if we act fast." "What kind of chance?" Sterling handed him a sealed file. "This is everything you need to challenge the interim vote. Proof of her wishes. You'll need to speak in front of the board." Nolan stared at the file, heart pounding. "You think they'll listen to me?" "They won't. But they might listen to her." Noreen had prepared a statement, a personal letter to the board, but it wasn't enough on its own. Someone had to deliver it. Someone who believed in it. Nolan spent that night reading the letter over and over. Her words were humble, sincere. She spoke about legacy, not of money or power, but of compassion, of seeing people, of recognizing worth where others didn't. She wanted the airline to be led by someone who didn't just manage. It had to be someone who understood. And she named Nolan Cade, explicitly, as her choice. The next morning, Nolan stood before the board, gripping the letter with trembling hands. He looked out at a dozen faces, polished, skeptical, and half smiling with silent contempt. He felt like an imposter in someone else's suit. But then he spoke. And for 10 minutes, he delivered not just Noreen's message, but his own. About why he'd stopped to help her. About how he never imagined any of this. About what he'd seen in her, and what she had helped him see in himself. He didn't ask them to believe in him. He asked them to believe in her, to honor what she stood for. When he finished, there was silence. Then one member, an older woman with silver hair, cleared her throat and said, "Let's vote." It came down to a tie, 6-6. The final vote belonged to the chairman. He looked at Nolan, looked at the letter, and slowly raised his hand. Motion passes. Interim leadership remains under Noreen Vellen's designated successor, Nolan Cade. Nolan couldn't breathe. He wasn't even sure he was standing upright. He'd won. But at what cost? That evening, a text came in from Raylan. "Heard what you did. Proud of you. Let's talk soon." But the moment of relief was short-lived, because the following week, a journalist published a breaking exposé that would throw everything into chaos. Noreen Vellen's past was not what it seemed, and one name buried in the article would send Nolan into a spiral. It was his mother's. Nolan couldn't move. He stared at the headline on the screen, feeling the floor vanish beneath his feet. Exclusive: Itravia CEO's secret past tied to former employee scandal. Is her protégé the link? There it was, in print. His mother's name, Marley Cade. The article claimed that 2 decades ago, Noreen had personally fired a single mother from a regional branch of the airline, then just a small commuter service, under pressure from higher management during a financial collapse. That employee? Marley Cade, a fuel supervisor accused of misreporting a maintenance delay that cost the airline a high-profile client. She had denied the allegation, but was never given a chance to clear her name. Nolan's chest tightened. He knew his mother had once worked in aviation. She never talked much about it, just said the industry wasn't for her, and moved on. He never knew she had worked for Itravia. Never knew she was pushed out. He scrolled further down. The article raised questions. Was Noreen grooming Nolan to ease public guilt? Was this all a strategy for redemption? Or worse, was Nolan just a convenient PR stunt? His phone exploded with notifications, calls, messages, tags. He ignored them all and drove straight to the hospital. Noreen was sitting up, pale but lucid, IV still in her arm, watching the same story unfold on the news. "I saw it," she said softly as he entered. "I knew it would come out eventually." Nolan didn't sit. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know, until I saw your last name on the apprentice form. And by then, I didn't know if I was trying to make amends or just trying to do the right thing too late." "You ruined her life," Nolan said. His voice cracked. "She worked 2 jobs for years to keep us fed. I thought she left because she wanted to. She carried that shame like a secret tattoo. She didn't deserve what happened. I know that now. But I didn't have power back then, Nolan. I was just another executive following orders. That excuse doesn't help her now." Noreen looked down. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted to give you something she was denied. A chance." He sat down, unable to stand any longer. "So what do I do now? Resign? Pretend this was never real?" "You do what you think is right," she said. "But Nolan, if you step down now, you won't just walk away from this position. You'll walk away from the kind of leader you could become. Don't let my mistake become yours." He left without saying another word. That night, Nolan went home and sat across from his mother in their small kitchen. The same one he grew up in. The same one where she used to count change to pay for groceries. He slid the printed article across the table. Marley read the headline, then paused. "I wondered when you'd find out." "You knew?" She nodded. "Of course I knew. I was there. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to grow up hating the world. I wanted you to build your own opinion, have your own future, not one shaped by my past." But it was her, Noreen. She did it. "She signed the form," Marley said. But I don't think she wanted to. Back then, there were people pulling strings behind the curtain. She was just the one standing in front when the curtain dropped. Nolan shook his head. I don't know what to believe anymore. I believe you helped someone in an airport without knowing who she was. I believe she saw the same thing I've always seen in you. Kindness, strength. That's who you are. That's what matters. But this job, everything I've built so far, it's tied to her. No, it's tied to you. She opened the door. You walked through it. He looked at her, eyes burning. You still think I should stay? I think, if you quit now, you'll regret it forever. The next morning, Nolan returned to headquarters. Reporters were everywhere. Sterling met him at the front door. We need to get ahead of this. I'm not going to hide. We can issue a joint statement, distance you from her. No, Nolan said. I want to talk to them myself. Are you sure? I'm sure. Minutes later, Nolan stood before dozens of flashing cameras and microphones. He didn't read from a script. My name is Nolan Cade. I didn't know who Noreen Vellon was when I helped her in that airport, and I didn't know what she'd done to my mother when she offered me this role. But here's what I do know. I'm not ashamed of my name, my past, or the job I've done. He paused. My mother was fired 20 years ago for something she didn't do. I believe her. And I believe people change. Noreen gave me a chance to become the kind of person she might have needed back then. Someone who speaks up. Someone who doesn't just follow orders. So no, I'm not stepping down. I'm stepping up. The cameras clicked wildly. Later that day, Noreen's resignation was submitted. Her condition had worsened, and she quietly appointed Nolan as interim CEO, not just as a symbolic gesture, but because she believed in his leadership. In the weeks that followed, Nolan reorganized executive priorities. He established a compensation fund for wrongfully terminated employees. He increased transparency, overhauled outdated discipline protocols, and personally called every regional branch to open direct lines of feedback. It wasn't easy. He faced resistance, backlash, even sabotage. But he also received thousands of letters, emails, messages from staff members, from people who remembered his mother, from young workers who felt seen for the first time. Raylan called again. This time they talked for an hour. Then they met. And for the first time in years, Nolan and his brother sat across from each other without resentment, just pride. And Marley? One morning, she stepped off a plane at the same terminal she once worked in. Only this time, she was greeted with flowers, applause, and a public apology delivered by her own son. The woman who once walked away in silence now walked through with her head held high. And Nolan? He kept showing up. Not for power, not for praise, but for people like his mom, and for every traveler who just needed someone to notice. Because sometimes, missing one flight can put you on a path you were always meant to take.